And a look now at global terrorist trends. Military success against ISIL and Boko Haram show a decline in the number of deaths in Iraq and Nigeria, according to the latest Global Terrorism database. But while the terror group's activities are weakened at home, they continue to spread to other countries. ISIL and its affiliates more than doubled their presence across the world. Nigeria's Boko Haram has spread into neighboring Niger, Cameroon and Chad, increasing the number of people killed in these three countries by 157%. The number of deaths caused by terrorism fell by 10% in 2015, but 6 countries out of 17 registered their highest number of deaths. The rise of terrorism also has had a significant economic impact, estimated at nearly $90 billion in 2015. Iraq suffered the highest, with Afghanistan, Nigeria, Pakistan and Syria also greatly affected. Operating within these countries are ISIL, Boko Haram and Taliban and Al-Qaeda. The 4 terror groups are said to be responsible for 74% of deaths from terrorism. But ISIL surpassed Boko Haram as the deadliest terrorist group in 2015. It carried out attacks in 252 different cities, killing more than 6,000 people. And to discuss these developments further, I'm joined live from Johannesburg by Naim Jena, a terrorism specialist. Naim, there has been a marked reduction in terror attacks in places like Nigeria and Kenya. What's the main contributing factor, though, and is this indicative of weakened terror groups in Africa?
Well, certainly in the case of Nigeria, that is the case. I mean, over the period of 2015, there was certainly a more coordinated attempt by governments in those 4 countries, Nigeria and Niger, Cameroon, etc., to combat Boko Haram, and they came together in order to be able to do that. And so Boko Haram's activities, or the deaths that it has caused, has reduced. It's been on the back foot for that period since 2015 and up to now. And so we see a reduction there in that respect. In Kenya, I think that the year before, the attacks by Al-Shabaab, the Somali group in particular in Kenya, caused a number of deaths. Last year, Shabaab was also a bit on the back foot in its territory where its core area of activity, which is Somalia, and has been focusing more of its attention there rather than its neighboring enemy. So I think these 2 factors, different factors in the 2 different countries, have ensured that those figures have come down somewhat.
Well, terror groups have been known, though, to often change attack. Is the lull in their attacks just another strategy before they strike again, do you think?
Not in the case of these 2 groups in Nigeria and the Somali group Al-Shabaab in Kenya. I think that they genuinely are taking a beating, and that they will be on the back foot. And I think that in the case of Boko Haram, certainly, it might not have a very long life ahead of it. This does not mean, of course, that another group such as Boko Haram won't come up. Boko Haram is a successor to a number of other groups in Nigeria that came up and mainly as a result of the real or perceived marginalization of populations in the north of that country. So I think that Boko Haram is on its way out. But unless the real issues are addressed, we could get another such group coming up. So I don't think that it's simply a kind of strategic or tactical lull for them before they strike again. I think that they're genuinely down.
Well, Naim, let's look briefly at the Global Terrorism Index, where it says most of the terror groups seem to be excelling in branching out to many countries such as Al-Qaeda, Al-Shabaab and ISIL. Why is this the case, and how can this be contained?
I think that firstly, I must say that we should be very careful about such indices. Firstly, just in terms of the way that they define terrorism as a threat or a threat of violence or an act of violence. And so, for example, most people in my country, in South Africa, would be very surprised to hear that according to this index, there were 2 terrorist incidents in South Africa last year, and 2 people were killed as a result. I don't know what it'll say about this year, where students were involved in protests and where university libraries were burnt down, for example, and how that would figure. So we must just be careful about how these are portrayed. As far as the branching out issue is concerned, this is certainly the case with the Islamic State group. Last year was when they changed their strategy. Their strategy had been up to around the middle of last year, one where they really focused in the territory that they controlled, part of Iraq and part of Syria, and attempted to protect that territory and to quote unquote govern that territory, and to do that as effectively as they could. But as the attacks by Western countries, and particularly the United States, France, etc., increased on that area that they were controlling, they then changed their strategy and decided to strike outwards. And so we saw at the end of last year the attacks in Paris, the attacks in Brussels and other places. And that's probably the main reason why the authors of this index say that the spike in the number of countries that have increased incidents. So although the number of people killed went down, you have many more countries that have experienced terrorist incidents. So before 2015 there were more people that were killed, but it was limited to a few countries. Now it has expanded, particularly in Europe, and I think that the authors of the index, being Westerners themselves, are particularly concerned about that kind of thing.
I want to get your views, though, on future U.S. involvement, particularly with the change of government. What do you think, though, will be the impact of a Donald Trump presidency in the U.S. on the global fight against terror?
Well, I think that what we're going to see is a much more aggressive approach from Donald Trump on particular, or his administration, on particular hotspots. I mean, he's already said, for example, that he would be very willing to join the Russians and focus in Syria, focus on bombing the Islamic State group. Now that could have a number of repercussions. For one thing, that group might decide that as it has undertaken operations in Europe, that it should expand and undertake more operations in the United States, and that's one possibility in terms of their change of strategy. But there's also another thing, and that is that a number of the groups that the United States has been arming and funding in Syria, opposition groups, Trump is now saying basically that he's going to withdraw that kind of support and focus on, together with the Russians, on the Islamic State group. The unhappiness around those groups could then result in other kinds of repercussions. So I think that while there's going to be a much harsher and more aggressive approach from a Trump administration, that the results are not necessarily one that will combat terror or reduce terror. In fact, you could see incidents where terrorism or terrorist acts could actually be increasing. The increase might not necessarily be in the US, but it could be in US allied countries like Turkey, like European countries.
Right, Naim Jena, he's a terrorism specialist joining us there from Johannesburg. Thank you.